Today's episode will not be about a new finding, but about the biggest finding ever within biblical archaeology, that is, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Hi guys, you have all heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but why do they matter to our faith? I'll be talking about that, as well as some questions about when, where, how, and who. And as you can see, we're not in the Dead Sea area at the moment. I'm in Denmark, where we finally got some snow and sunshine.
On the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea, they did an astounding discovery in 1947. Actually, it was two Bedouin boys who discovered the first 7 intact scrolls from what has become known as Cave 1. As they were searching for a lost sheep, one of the boys threw a stone into a cave, thinking that the sheep might become scared and come running out, but instead of a bleating sheep, he heard the cracking of pottery. When he went in, he discovered pottery jars in which were some ancient scrolls. As these two Arabic boys couldn't read the writing, they passed them on, and they ended up with an antique dealer called Kando. None of them realized that this was the biggest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. 3 other scrolls ended up with a professor, and the other 4 ones were sold in the Wall Street Journal in 1954. There was an ad: biblical manuscripts dating back to at least 200 BC are for sale. From 1947 to 1956, they discovered 10 more caves in the same area near the ruins of the Qumran settlement. This picture from inside a cave after they had cleaned it up. Frequent earthquakes has shattered much of the materials hidden in these caves. On top of 2,000 years of time, bats had covered everything in their excrements, so it took years to clean it up and try to put the fragments together. Now there's a special museum, the Shrine of the Book, where you can see many of the materials found. This is a picture of a part of scroll 1QISA, and the 1Q means it's found in Qumran Cave 1, IS means the Book of Isaiah, and A means it's the first copy. They found 2 copies. Critics of the Bible have surely hoped that we would never find a scroll like this, as Isaiah prophesies very specifically about the Messiah. Now we have 2 copies, pretty complete copies, not only fragments, and these are copies of Isaiah, including chapter 53, proving that the prophecies were written before Jesus was born, so they are true, documented, verifiable prophecies. Here I just listed 10 of the parallels between what we know about Jesus from the New Testament and what Isaiah 53 says, and it's just from this one book and this one chapter. The prophecies about the Messiah fit supernaturally well on Jesus. Atheists and Jews find this very hard to disprove. So the question is, were the prophecies really written before Christ? Yes, they were, and we can prove that with the Dead Sea Scrolls. This Aleppo Codex from 920 AD is the world's oldest full copy of the Old Testament in Hebrew. For the last 1,000 years since then, this was the best copy that we had to translate the Old Testament from. Let me just show you a simple timeline where we illustrate where we are right now in the 2000s, where we have smartphones and stuff. 1,000 years ago we had Vikings, at least here in Scandinavia. Then there was Jesus 2,000 years ago, and the Old Testament was finished about 400 BC. So in the period until our oldest surviving copy, we have about 1,300 years without any full copies of the Old Testament in the original language. Then, when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, the gap shrunk with at least 1,000 years, and now we have a copy that is much closer to the original writings. How well did they copy the originals? Well, let's focus on chapter 53 of Isaiah and look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and compare them to this previously oldest copy that we had from 920 AD. There were only 17 letters in a whole chapter different, and 10 are just spelling differences, 4 stylistic changes, and 3 letters were added, so it's a word light in verse 11, just 1 out of 166 words is different, and it doesn't change anything in the meaning. The scriptures are trustworthy. They did an excellent job of copying the text for 1,000 years, so surely they copied them correctly for a few centuries since the originals were pinned down until the Dead Sea Scrolls were written. These copies, the Dead Sea Scrolls, include messianic prophecies that were fulfilled by Jesus, and they were written before he was born. And that is why we call it the biggest discovery of the 20th century. There were lots of documents, different kinds of documents, and many of them are in fragments. Like in Cave 4, there were 500 manuscripts, but not one intact scroll. So it's a big puzzle where even pieces are missing, and it's covered in debris and bad guano, as I mentioned. So it took a long time just to clean it. The Dead Sea Scrolls took a really long time to translate. Much of it wasn't published until 1991, but now we can find a lot of it online. And most of it was written in Hebrew, Aramaic and Greek, as expected, on parchments and some on papyrus, which was an expensive material at the time. And most of them date from 150 BC to 70 AD, and some are even older than that. So it was the Jewish sect, the Essenes, that hid the Dead Sea Scrolls in about 68 AD during the war with the Romans. On the left we have an aerial view of the Qumran settlement. On the right there's a model of it, and here where we have two arrows there's a basin for rainwater and a canal leading to a starred pool. The Dead Sea Scrolls include at least fragments from every book of the Old Testament, except perhaps from the book of Esther. The apocryphal or pseudepigraphical books are from the period between the Old and the New Testament, and the sectarian manuscripts are from the Essenes themselves, from their community. Here is an example of a sectarian roll. It's a so-called temple scroll. It's the longest one and the last to be found. It's found in Cave 11. Interestingly enough, they also found a scroll made out of copper. They have now opened it and see that it's actually a list of 64 hiding places. And they have been using different kinds of techniques to read the scrolls better. Some are very hard to read, but here a company helped doing infrared imaging where you much clearer can see the text. And these are quite interesting, even though they look like very dry at first glance. On the left we have the mikveh with the stairs. It's a Jewish pool for ritual baths and full body immersions, and that's what they used in Jerusalem also when they baptized the 3,000 people on day of Pentecost. On the right is the basin that collected rainwater. It should be rainwater for a mikveh. I love these findings and biblical archaeology, as it at times gives us a glimpse into their lives, looking at these everyday items. So, what do I learn from these Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, two things I want to mention here at the end. Number one, the Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah fit extremely well, supernaturally well, with Jesus, which is so impressive as they were written before he was born, which now is a proven fact. And number two, the scriptures, that is our Bible, is trustworthy, and people did an excellent job of copying the original text. All of this builds my faith up, and I'll see you next time with some more biblical archaeology. Take care. Bye bye.